Yeah, maybe for next week. But yeah, I think
No, he doesn't. He doesn't do it. He doesn't. He doesn't do the derivative categories. He mentions what some of them would be. He does say in B108.
Okay.
He says. Yeah, here we go. So he said, this is kind of like a shortcut. He's got the categories already. And in B108, he says, we can, however, come close to achieving that aim of completing the tree if we pick up a textbook on ontology and subordinate the predicables to the categories, e.g., to the category of causality, the predicables of force, action, undergoing, or passion, in the footnote, to the category of community, the predicables of presence, resistance, and to the predicaments of modality, the predicables of arising, passing away, change, and so on. Yeah. So when the categories are combined either with the modes of pure sensibility or with one another, they yield a great multitude of derivatives. So if we get an expert shows up, that's my first question: is what the heck are the modes of pure sensibility?
Huh?
Yeah,
Might be worth it to take a look at it right here if anybody would like.
I think part of the problem is...
there he is. Yeah, hi.
I think part of the problem is that, you go back in those times and the educated classes were all up on grammar and fine appreciations. We've lost a lot of language and we've lost a lot of structure.
There's always something to be said for that. We might make a conversation about how we can only understand any given author or any given writer or thinker in the context that they were writing in the socio-cultural context that they lived in.
Yeah, well, they used to teach grammar up to a certain point. I think shortly after World War II, they stopped teaching grammar in schools, for example. People prior to that were trained in grammar. We aren't, unless you're extremely old.
Yeah, I had to stop just getting annoyed by bad orthography on the web, and even in magazines and newspapers now. The standards have plunged, but I realized I needed to screw that up.
Yeah, I found a women's magazine from 1990 in my mother's place, and I was shocked to read, the articles would run for pages, extremely long paragraphs, and they're very concise. Compared to the stuff you might find in print now, it was just disastrous. I was criticising one of our local existentialists. I got a bit tired of him. He was talking about Nestorius, the Christian heretic, so to speak, and mentioned, of course. Yeah, well, the Nestorians spread to the Mongolians, and then he starts talking about Genghis Khan. He goes, "Oh, that Genghis Khan was a terrible fellow, and okay, right, cool." And every time we mentioned Genghis Khan, it was, something that, a derogatory application. Genghis Khan the evil, he was a really bad man. Every time we mentioned Genghis Khan's name, and news articles are prolific with it now. If you get poor old Trump, okay, you can have whatever opinion you like of Trump, but you don't do a news article saying Trump the bloody evil. Every sentence, like the subscriber can make up their own mind, can't they? Or aren't you allowed to make up your own mind? That you have to picture somebody according to their card.
Apparently, you don't have a subscription to the New York Times, Stephen. You know.
No, I don't.
Like, yeah, there's more there than meets the eye. There's the New York Times, and the other one is the Washington Post. Both of those have been very creative in the ways that they insult the soon-to-be ex-president.
I heard an interview with somebody who was saying, think of the upcoming movies in upcoming years and decades. And he was saying, yeah, Donald Trump will be one of the great movie villains for the next couple of decades.
Cool. There's some random guy with red hair will show up.
We're in for decades of Donald Trump as the villain. Yeah. In movies.
People stepping out of skyscrapers.
Like Nixon, or you know.
Yeah. We can have a Trump Jr. replace.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, maybe with their political career of that family. We'll see.
Yeah.
2 more days.
I still say, pay attention to the Bush family. That family never gives up. Pay attention to Jeb. Keep your eye on Jeb. I'm serious. Keep your eye on Jeb. Watch what he does. That family never quits. They're not done. I'm telling you right now. They're not done. Know that. That family
Jeb.
never gives up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Jeb could run again.
Yeah, watch Jeb. Pay attention.
Hi,
you
Jason.
watch.
Yeah.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Daniel.
We've gone green again, man. Oh, yeah,
Hi,
you're okay again.
David.
Well, I started the recording. We can start if we wanted to.
Okay.
So today, last section about Kant.
Well, okay, yeah. James was talking about the 4 categories that do we want to start there?
Yeah, well, let's go. It's starting pretty late, but yeah, we
Okay.
can do that. We can start. That's kind of like the main topic.
Okay.
So, I was noticing in the categories.
These are them right there, right?
Yeah, that's right. And he disses. He does a little dissing of Aristotle here. He says, Aristotle sure got that wrong, and here's the real categories. So, but he got the idea. He admits that he got the whole idea for posting the categories from Aristotle. Yeah, I would be pleased if anyone could sort of like sort out the what would you say they're
Sorted out. I only discovered they existed yesterday.
Yeah, it's on page A70B95. On the understanding of that's the judgments. I'm sorry, I actually got on the wrong page. Pardon me. It's page A80B106. And it's funny, because the judgments are on the other page before that, and about 6 pages back are the judgments, and they look suspiciously similar. They go quantity of judgments, universal, particular, singular, and then quality of judgments are affirmative, negative, infinite, then relations, and these are almost like logical classes. The first three are logical classes: relation, which are categorical, hypothetical, and disjunctive. And then the fourth one is not actually a class of logic. It's called modality, and it means problematic, assertoric, and apodictic, and it gives further definitions of those. But then in the categories, I don't know what the definitions of these would be, except that they're a little bit similar. There's the quantity and the quality again. The quantity are unity. This is on page B106. Unity, plurality, and allness. And then quality, it's reality, negation, and limitation. And then thirdly, on relation, that's where it seems to go nuts. It's substantia and accidens, inherent, which is inherence and subsistence. And then cause and effect, causality and dependence, in other words. And then agent and patient, which he calls community, interaction between agent and patient. But community, he also uses the word community for anything that has interrelations, things that have interrelations, and that are what do you call that? Manifolds. And then number 4 is modality again, and this is very similar. Possibility, impossibility is the first one. The second one is existence. Non-existence is the second one, which sounds like a truth relation. I don't understand it exactly. And then number 3 is necessity and contingency.
Hey, James.
Yeah.
I find myself when I'm reading this, I'm trying to give myself an example. It may be very plebeian to do this, but can we maybe pick one of these and just, try and, test drive it? In an example of even of a thought, or just sometimes I get lost with the classifications, and that's kind of the upside of bringing it to the group. As I thought, is there somebody that can kind of run with this and say, okay, here's an example, and just let's just see what happens.
What page is this, David?
It's B106. Do you have the AB numbers? Do you have the AB numbers, Stephen?
Is this the Cambridge? Is it?
Either one, but they're both on the same. The AB pages are the same no matter what edition you're reading. So we're talking B106.
If you are using Cambridge, that's a 206 and that's 212.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I think unity, plurality, totality, one, many, and all. That's as many quantities as there could possibly be.
Oh, good, David. I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Quality.
in that, in quantity, there's a relationship between them. But a plurality implies there are individual unities. And a totality means you have both a plurality and a unity all together. That it is one unity that encompasses all of the individuals in which are the plurality. So he talks about these in this book.
Yeah. The totality itself becomes a unity of the totality.
Unity of a plurality, right?
Could you have more than one totalities? Multi-totalities?
No. Not of the same thing, of a thing. Like a totality would be the all-encompassing.
Right, it would be, yeah.
Okay,
All right,
yeah.
so
let's-
quality, reality, negation, limitation. Not sure I'm able to do that one.
Excuse me, I think we should look at from the previous one, which is the judgment. Because Kant said all the judgment is from Aristotle, the traditional, the 12th judgment. And for each judgment, they have a priori concept of category exists. So that's why both looks very similar. Because, for example, for the universal, right? That's the example of all men are mortal, right? So that's universal. In order to have a universal statement or judgment, we need to have a concept of a unit. That means you put all men as one unit, then you can have this one. So by this thinking, that's why section 9, Kant talk about on the clue to discovery of all pure concepts. So for each judgment, they provide a clue to find the category. On the second one, the concept of the table of category. So I think that's why it got a one-to-one comparison. Yeah. So, for example, like universal, okay, it's like all men are mortal, right? And then particular, something like some people are poor, okay? So that means you have a concept of plurality. You have the concept of many, right? So singular means, let's say, this dog is black. So you have the concept of this one. So that means you have the totality. That's why you have a single one. This one is not very clear. But basically, the logic is you provide the clue for the category. So you have the 12 judgment, and then you have 12 category. That's the idea. Does that make sense? Or?
Does everyone know what the point of Aristotle's categories is?
What the what is, Scott?
The point of it.
Well, Aristotle's categories, I think, were introducing logical, kind of like logical topics. He mentions the ones that he doesn't like so much. I don't have the Aristotle here, but he mentions, but it's translated here, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, posture, state, action, passion. So they seem relevant. Aristotle's categories are categories of life, categories of relation to things, because Aristotle was a biologist and a physicist. He was interested in those kinds of topics. So they're all his topics are involved in the categories.
So is the purpose of these that these are the most general kinds of forms of concepts, and that all judgments are going to be formed by using these underlying concepts to construct understandings or propositions or judgments, and judgments are sewn together from the table of judgments, but the concepts all are these, and these are the concepts that have to be shown to underlie all of understanding that applies to objective reality, so that we can prove that this describes everything that we need to proceed in the study of reason applied to objective reality.
As a matter of fact, he says these are the pure concepts of synthesis. There are the original. So in other words, the real one, the real group of 12 total group of 12 pure concepts of synthesis. And he even says the understanding already contains these a priori. So this is like more a priori information from Kant about what is synthetic a priori, what we can use synthetically a priori. So I guess the task here is to kind of say, well, I can synthesize something using reality or negation or limitation. I can make or these other, I can synthesize from unity and plurality and inherence and substance and so forth. But that's quite a challenge. In other words, if these are all the origin of synthesis, why doesn't he give more examples than he does?
He probably assumed we know I think he assumed we know the example because all the category is derived. It should be a priori to the 12 judgment on the early one. So the example actually exists, should be in the judgment side.
He has more examples there, yeah.
Yeah, I think he assumed you have the example on the category of judgment. And for each judgment, you will require a priori concept exists. Before you make this judgment, you should already have this concept. That's why I have 1-to-1. So the example is on the judgment. And I think when he called judgment, actually it's our, we will call it a proposition, like all men are mortal, or some men are poor, something like this. That's a proposition that he called judgment. So if we provide example on it, he provide a few examples on the judgment. So if we know the judgment, then you will assume, because before you make this judgment, you should have some concept a priori. And that's why you got the 12 concept in the category.
Yeah, he does say, he says, this division of the categories has been generated systematically from a common principle, viz. Our ability to judge, which is equivalent to our ability to think. So in other words, he's saying when in making the synthesis from the categories, that's our thinking, and it's equivalent. When he's saying it's equivalent to our ability to make a judgment, the ability to make a judgment is a little bit more transcendental logic, and the ability to think involves finding categories that match manifolds of intuition, probably. So we get these manifolds of intuition, and then we're kind of like, well, I got a manifold of intuition. What's a category I could apply this to? Does that sound warm to anyone? Cole?
Yeah, I think that's right. And so we can, for example, like if you look at the affirmative, right? Affirmative, the example would be, let's say, how do you say?
Something's red.
Dog is an animal, right? Dog is an animal. That's an affirmative. So before you make this affirmative statement or affirmative judgment, you should have the concept of reality. So that means reality doesn't mean empirical. That means you have the concept of reality. So you can say dog is an animal, or you can say this apple is red, because you have the concept of reality. And if you say apple is not animal, right? Then you have a concept of negation, right? Negative. Okay. So the third one will be a little bit confused. I read some explain like infinity. Basically, he's talking about like how do you say, apple is non-animal. Okay, something like this. That's a negative definition. That means you only single out one definition. Then that means you have infinity possibility, infinite possibility to define. Okay, and then you need a concept of limitation. It's a little bit odd, but I think the logic is kind of like this. If we exercise it a few times, we probably will get clear out.
Yeah, so in those examples, when you say the apple's red, red is an empirical concept. But when you're talking about
red empirical,
these are the pure concepts. So it's from these that you build your empirical concept in the first place.
Yeah, so you need the concept of reality. And then then in the next section on the transcendental deduction, so you are going to have a priori concept, then you try to match on the real world. It's so this part that I think he called it metaphysical deduction, and then A and the B, that's a transcendental deduction. So I think that's the difference.
What do you mean by what's A and B?
I think if you look at the I eventually figure out the structure. On this part, he called it later on he called it the metaphysical deduction. Okay, that's why he comes to 12th category. Then they have the A version and the B version. And I think usually people focus on B version, and the B version is transcendental deduction. And they have another deduction or A version. I believe I didn't read. Yeah.
There's only one version of the metaphysical deduction. But I brought up Aristotle.
Oh, they have an A, right? What's an A? I didn't read it, so I'm not sure.
The metaphysical deduction is in both versions. But I asked the question about Aristotle because in Aristotle's categories, he thinks he's finding something interesting about all beings. The categories are ceiling concepts. If you go any higher than a category, then all the content disappears. So if you can take this particular red, that falls under red. Red falls under hue. Hue falls under color. Color falls under quality. And what does quality fall under? Nothing. You can't get any higher than quality. So quality passed the test, and Aristotle says this is a ceiling concept. It contains the juice that all the subconcepts borrow from. All the subconcepts are species or determinations of this highest concept. So what you can do is you can look at any object sitting on your table, and you can make a list of all the adjectives or predicates that you can apply to it, and then take each of those and go upwards in generality until you can't go upwards anymore. So Kant criticized this method because it seemed haphazard. And in fact, Aristotle changes the number of categories. And at one time it's 8, I think, and then it's 10, and then it's 12. So Kant thinks this is a bad sign. When you keep, you don't poll the truth. You don't vote on the truth. And there's another point, and that's being, we feel, is unified. There's a unity in being, and there's a unity in experience. So if we really had access to the essence of being or the essence of the unity of experience, we should be able to go in the other direction. In other words, from the supreme principle containing all the information, like the grand unified theory, downwards. And then we can derive the categories from a supreme principle. So Kant thinks the supreme principle is the unity of being that is tied up in some way with the unity of experience, which is tied up in some way with the fact that experience is always being ingested through intentionality. and intentionality is always being expressed when it's epistemic through judgment, which means proposition. So Kant says, wouldn't it be nice, he's just dreaming at this point, wouldn't it be nice if we could derive the categories from rules that are present in all judgment, just like all categories are present in every object. So my coffee cup has, I can answer each of the Aristotelian category questions from my coffee cup. It's being affected by the stove. It has its substance, it's its coffee cup self, it's the juice, and the quantity is one. It's relation to this and that. It's position is here or there. It's when is when. So Kant's fantasizing. Is it possible that we could go in the opposite direction from top down by doing an anatomy of necessary things going on inside of the propositional epistemic attitude, and from that derive our category? So this is what he's trying to do. He's trying to derive semantics from syntax, and he thinks it's possible, and he thinks that it's safe because logic hasn't changed. He gets these his table of judgments comes from the Port Royal logic book. It was a standard textbook in his day. So in those forms seem to be a complete list in his time. So this was the idea. So he's going to try to derive stealing concepts from an anatomy of judgment. And the things in the anatomy are not empirical concepts like green and cat, but the structure of judgment itself, which is the subject-predicate relation, and then these other things that today we call truth-functional operators. A truth-functional operator is something that you can flip without even knowing the contents of the sentences. For example, if A then B, if B then C, if A then C. A, B, and C could be anything, but if they overlap so that the A's are A's and B's are B's, then I can know that A is C. Well, how have I done that? I haven't done anything. So the rule of inference and the if-then form is built in. It's something that we come to the world with. What about the subject-predicate relation? Where is that found on the screen of pixels? It's not. We bring the subject-predicate relation to the world, and then we'll find out later on, the imagination plays with the pixels so that the pixel realm can give us something that can fit under a subject and under a predicate. Because pixels are neither subject nor predicate. They're just pixels. And all and some, we know the rules of all and some. We know that if all X are something, then some X are something. How'd you do that? It's amazing. Well, he calls that a priori. You don't have to go in the world. If all apples are red, which they're not, but let's pretend. If all apples are red, then we know that some apples are red. And so there are certain things about judgment or sentences that allow us to play with truth and preserve truth inside our head without checking our sensation, like some, all, and, or, if, then, must, possibly. So these are logical operators, and these are built-in syntactic things. So Kant's dream is to derive like universal feeling concepts that apply to all objects from the place that you love to derive them from, namely from the observer. Because if there's a color that applies to everything, the safest place to put it is in the lens of the perceiver. If you want to say that everything in the world is red, you can never be sure if you're using the world as your test, because you'd have to check all objects, all possible objects in the universe. But if you're wearing red glasses, you're done. So this is the method. Kant's thinking, if you want to do metaphysics the right way, because metaphysics is about must always. Hume showed us that we can't pull must always from the world. If there is must always, it's going to have to be inside of us or not at all. So Kant is saying, what he's saying here is prepare yourselves, everyone. I'm going to use a logic textbook to derive ceiling concepts.
So if this isn't the logic, this is a logic textbook from the 18th century. So I'm wondering if we looked at 20th century logic, some of the names, Quine, Tartowski, Tarski, that's it. So if we took some of the 20th century additions to or narrowing down of logic that happened with Peirce and so forth, what what would we end up with? A different set of values, for making judgments than Kant did, and I guess that's my first question. Since this is based on that, not incorrectly, but it's based on a kind of a narrower view of logic. Would we come up with a different list of judgments? And has anyone sort of done this, gone through the judgments and created a list of all possible judgments that they could find in the newspaper, for example? What judgments, in about politics, science, family life, morality, what judgments have been made and are made on a daily basis, and how do they fit into the table of categories? Or is that just an individual choice? Do we have to, each of us, go through all the judgments we make every day and fit them into the categories?
Well, if his approach is right, then you would say that all the observations in science nowadays, or in other disciplines, would be about observables, and observables are about appearance, and descriptions of appearance have to do with what can affect your sensations and observations in the empirical world. Anything else is a different discussion. So the empirical world isn't any different in terms of these categories applying as the non-empirical concepts. Is there anything that we could express about the empirical world that would not fall under these concepts, which are totally non-empirical concepts, right?
Reality. How do we make a judgment about reality? He's saying that reality is a pure concept of the understanding. So how do we make a judgment about reality, and how is that non-empirical?
Well, I think that the reality is non-empirical reality. That's your concept of reality. Not talking about something real. He's talking about the concept of reality. So if I say Jason is a man, that's affirmative, right? So I say Jason is a man. That's affirmative. That means, but we don't know it's true or not true, right? We don't know who is Jason. We don't know what's the meaning of man. You never check. You don't know. But you say that because you have the concept called reality. So after that, you can check. Okay, is this guy named Jason? Is he a man? Okay, so that's what you can do. So the reality is nothing empirical. That's a concept. Same as negation. I say Jason is not a woman, right? So you have a concept of not, negation. Okay, so that's why you have this kind of statement. When Kant say judgment, actually we can say it's a proposition, true false statement. So I think that's the way he's talking about. And again, if you talk about modern logic, like I think Bertrand Russell totally rejects this one because his logic is totally changed. So he doesn't. That's why he never accepts Kant. I think he grades Kant very low in his book. It's very low graded. The reason is from the beginning he rejects everything. So that's nothing to talk about.
Nothing to talk about.
I would claim a proposition doesn't determine the possibility or the probability.
The probability is on the modality, right? You have the.
So how do we come to a proposition? We see something, like a horse, and we form a proposition about it. I might say it's good eating.
I think.
So how do we come to a proposition from an event? We're seeking to explain something.
The word is can. So can I drink water? Can I be recognized as a man? Can I can something be both non-red, and apple.
I think the probability basics is I think we talk of proposition. So you should be Jason may be a man, right? So if you say Jason may be a man, you use maybe. That means Jason possibly a man. So you have the concept. If you flip on the next page, there's the concept of possibility and impossibility, right? So we have the concept before we check the reality. Okay. So we say Trump may leave. Okay. Probably Trump may leave on Wednesday, right? So we don't know it's going to happen or not, but we have the concept of possibility. Okay. I think that's the way he talked about.
Well, possibilities are determination whether something is possible or impossible.
That's right.
That's something we do in logic. Now, we can have a proposition. We can have a proposition which is illogical. We test it with logic. And once we've tested a proposition with logic, whether it's possible or impossible, we go to the stage of saying, well, it's probable or improbable.
That's right, but Kant haven't talked this part. We haven't reached that part yet. We just only on the thought. Okay, we have the statement, and he's working backward. When I say this may be, I say this computer may be made by Apple. Okay, so that means we don't know it's really made by Apple or not, but we have the concept of possible and impossible, right? And we haven't checked yet. Okay.
I think we needed to distinguish between general logic, which is what we're familiar with, and Kant's new logic, which he's now going to invent in the upcoming section. James's question about today's logic textbooks, that's good. So yes, in order for Kant's project to work, he would have to have a list of just the elements. Compounds should be excluded from your list of basic things. So water wouldn't be in there, but hydrogen and oxygen would be, or electrons and protons and neutrons, those are in there, and from those you can make everything. So if you want to play that game, like, what are the non-optional, essential logical elements that we need in order to be able to stare at the world in an epistemic attitude and have something? Today's logic textbook would be very short on its list of essential operators, because we can derive all logical operators from the Schaefer stroke and from joint denial. This means that you can't have not P and not Q. So it'd be a very small table. It would contain one logical operator, and so from the permutations of that basic operator, you can derive all the other ones. So in the sense, that question that can't be what's going on here. And then the other idea someone mentioned was, our scientific sentences, can we just collect sentences and boil them down? And I think that might be a better way, because scientists still use the words and or, even when they're speaking with equations. So they can say in a formula, and then they can say and, or, not. So these terms are still at work, and they're still at work in their surer way. So we know that if any sentence is true, if I say it is not the case that, that's negation. If I put the phrase "it is not the case that" before it, now it becomes false. So no matter how advanced your science is, if there's a sentence P in that science, and then you say not P, if P was true, then not P would be false. So Kant is looking at truth of preserving things. And also, it's really important to remember that Kant is Copernican. So there are no categories built in to the person. We don't have innate concepts in us that we try to match onto the world. If you're doing that, then you're doomed to lose. That's pre-Copernican. It turns out that the categories, which are the semantic versions of these logical operators, after they've been transformed through the process of synthesis, those things come after experience. So substance, property, causality, these are concepts that we abstract after experience. It's a posteriori. It comes after experience. But the rules that we use to tie the pixels together so that we have an experience of objects, that is a priori. So the rules that combine sensations together into this hallucination of physical abiding bodies in space and all this stuff, that comes after processing by the logical rules. Then we get our categories from that. So this is unfortunate that Kant uses pure concepts and categories synonymously. The real pure concepts are laws of syntax. Those are built into the human. Then they process pixels, and then after a few years, the child moves her head back and forth and says, cup, book, and then one day, substance dawns, and she realizes, oh my God, these are substances. They're extended things that perdure through time. But she didn't have the concept of substance yet, like, object permanence in Piaget. That has to.
Yeah, but Scott, about what you're saying, she didn't have experience before that either.
What do you mean?
Until she got the concept, she didn't have experience of the empirical world that we're calling experience. She needs that concept. She has disjointed, confused, illogical combinations of experiences. She doesn't fall into the category here of this rational understanding yet. Until she learns to do that, I think these categories are a priori, and they may have to be learned, that they are not learned from experience.
Oh, I see. No, I didn't mean that they were okay. So a category for Kant is the universal, and it's the same type of thing as red and dog. Universals are developed through a process he calls comparison, reflection, abstraction. So you take two trees, move your head back and forth, you see how they're different. And then after a while, you see that they share things in common. And these will eventually become the concepts leaf, branch, and so on. And then finally, you after that act of reflection and comparison, you're able to pull off these concepts, like the concept tree and the concept bread. So Kant says that the category.
But Scott, again, Scott. But one thing, look, this is not the critique of pure reason. You're talking about a developmental stage, which he's assuming by the time we're in the critique of pure reason, right? It's interesting how he imagines that psychology working. That is not part of this text or his proof, right?
Well, later on, you'll see that the categories of semantic concepts are universals, and they're generated through this process of comparing, reflecting, and abstracting. The pure concepts are deeper things that we're not applying or intending at all. The pure concepts are the things that we can't help, but they're in operation spontaneously and automatically, and no matter, you can't help it, you're stitching pixels together into substances that have properties. And so you don't need experience to have your syntactic operators in force, but you do need experience to be able to reflect on what's happening by your own synthesis. So your machine is automatically putting things together. Over time, you see what your own machine has done. And then you develop these advanced, thick things like causality, substance, and property. But at the beginning, you didn't have that. You just had the first grunt, which tracked the thing in space and time, that became substance. And then the second grunt, which became a platonic orthogonal thing that's outside of space and time, like black, green, and so on. So there's two stages. There's the logical operator, which through the magic of transcendental logic isn't working on concepts, it's working on pixels. And then later on, after things have been congealed together, then you can start peeling off universals like substance.
Well, I want to reiterate James' question then, which was what we now have developed as a modern logic, which may have more extensive categories describing thought. Have we gone outside of this paradigmatically? Or is this still what it means to do science requires this foundation and this order and this organization of thought? Or have we got new categories? Because as I wrote in the comments, this is one of them, to me, might be a new area. There's no truth about location and spatiality for an electron, but it's part of substance. So have we got new areas where we have conceptualization without these categories?
Yes. Look at quantum mechanics. In quantum mechanics, because of the formalism, if you know position, you kill momentum. If you know momentum, you kill position. So remember before, like with space and time, the reality, numerical reality may not be Euclidean, but we can't help but intuit things in flat free space. In the same way, we know from quantum mechanics that you can't freely add and subtract predicates. We think that in our Kantian phenomenal tiny world, we think that objects have both position and momentum, and that the and operator can be safely applied. But in fact, it can't. It turns out that having one property destroys the reality of the second property. So it looks like there's another example of the numerical thing doesn't fit our easy, what he calls general logic. General logic is it's ours.
So we cannot understand the world as physics describes it. We fail to understand. We have a mathematical model which we do not, in any intuitive way, understand. This is what Feynman says: if you understand it, you don't understand it.
Right,
because there's no understanding of it. Okay.
Let me.
We know by inference. We know by inference and reason that these formulas of physics are true, but we still can't see the bending of space, and we still can't see non-locality. It's something that violates our powers of imagination. That's exactly right. So if you try to have it hit home at the level of being in a diagrammatic, on your screen thing like a circle or a triangle, it fails. And if you want it to hit home so that you can bring it into the subject-predicate relation, it fails. So he's saying that the subject-predicate is a prison house of the human, and the flat space and that's a prison house of the human. The real reality, we know, our formulas tell us that things are a certain weird way, and we see the formula saying it, but when we try to crystallize it in imagination, we fail, because subject-predicate in flat space has poisoned us.
Okay,
James, so do you think that's an answer, that we actually haven't developed the new ways of thinking for physics yet, or that we may not ever be able to?
No, I think it's a damn poor answer, David. But I want to moderate now. I just want to it's a thoughtful answer though, Scott. I don't want to be too negative. I do want to moderate and make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. And this is a really good topic. I was going to change the topic a little, but I'll wait. I wanted to go back to the to section to before the sections to the introduction to Transcendental Logic. But let's just. Daniel's been waiting to speak or ask a question, and this is a good topic that we just started. The kind of relevance of Kant in the 20th and 21st century science, when we have so much science that makes the categories, that seems to make the categories a bit outmoded. Daniel, you're next.
All right, so I wanted to get a clarification on Scott's point. Scott brings this up a lot. I think it's part of how he explains things. He uses the word pixels a lot.
Pixels.
And if I understand that correctly, I'm thinking this is a received, it's a receiver, and it's a receiver of information from an external source. And I think that I just wanted to just clarify that with Scott, because I'm trying to weave together his points, and he says a lot, so I'm trying to get that. So that was the first one for Scott. And then secondly, something that I've been working on in terms of the quantum physics is the unity of one, the very concept of the point, and having a dimension to the point, essentially changing the characteristics of the concept of one. And I think, anyways, that's where I go. I don't want to pull the conversation down a rabbit hole, but I think it's interesting when we frame it from a quantum physics standpoint, and I can see already that there's a different way to look at this that may not be considered. So that was just my second point, and yeah, that's it.
Scott, what do you make of that?
You probably went for Matzenberg.
Okay.
I use the word pixel. Kant uses the phrase manifold of intuition. And he says elsewhere that in a moment, attention is full in a minimal extension. He gets this from Hume. So if you want to know what is the size of maximal apprehension by consciousness, Kant would say it's not the full span of space that you get in front of your eyes. If you want to know what maximum absorption is, reduce your consciousness to a size where the information requires no time to synthesize. In other words, you swallow the whole at once. What length of time would that be? And what extension would that be where no stitching is required? And the answer is momentary length of time and minimal extension. So the amount of sense information that you get all at once without any additive work that would bring the categories in would be a point moment. And I'm calling it a point moment. Actually, it's a passing pixel is better than pixel, because we want to get that its size is not only minimal, but its duration is minimal. So that is the thing that sense consciousness gets without any work. That's what's supplied by intuition without any work of additive accumulation and putting together. And the quantum physics thing, that was just to say that the subject-predicate relation, like Chomsky says, is universal across the planet. So can humans ever get beyond their addiction to having topics and then descriptors? The topic is the subject and the predicate is the descriptor. Can we ever get beyond topic descriptor? It seems that we're stuck that way. I mean, in meditation, in Brooksonian meditation too, you withhold. There's an epoche that happens in meditation where you withhold the subject predicate relation. You stop the natural attitude and you kind of disappear. And I think that's actually I think that's a valid apprehension of real true reality. But when you have an epistemic attitude and you want to know, knowing forces us into this topic descriptor structure. And it seems that maybe we might be stuck with that. So if you want to talk about quantum mechanics, you're going to have topics in your sentences and you're going to have predicates of them. And it seems like we're stuck with that.
So Fred has been very patient. Thank you, Fred. I have to unmute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I wonder if there was a question of the application of domain here. And as I understand it, these logical functions of judgment and the categories are intended to be comprehensive of connections between manifolds that are apprehended by sensible intuition. And therefore, I wonder if it's appropriate to get off into, say, 20th century physics.
I think I have an answer for that. So one of the things go ahead.
Another observation following that, and that is that that's all quite interesting, particularly since I have a background in math and physics, but my hope in the group is to understand Kant's text as he developed it in his time, not criticisms of his text from the perspective of 21st century critics.
Right. Yeah.
I wonder if
yes.
Our discussion by first clarifying what Kant said in the context of his time, his science and his understanding, Copernicus, not venturing past Copernicus and Newton. And then, if we have time, to subsequently delve into speculations about how this applies to quantum mechanics, etc.
I just wanted to mention Kant does have two different. He does have a distinction between the manifold of induction and the manifold of manifold inside of a concept in pure understanding. So while there can be a manifold of what would you call it? Things appearing inside a manifold of appearances, right? So there could be a manifold of appearances in an intuition, but that doesn't necessarily affect the manifold of appearances that the manifold of concepts that appears in understanding, and or in pure understanding, as he calls it. So these rules of categories are to apply to the pure understanding. They're categories in the pure understanding. And there are manifolds there, but they're not necessarily the same, according to Kant, as the manifold of appearances that occurs in intuitions. So, and that's in the, he talks about that really heavily just before the, actually in the Transcendental Logic. He says, this is on B89, he talks about the points that matter in the dissection of understanding's pure cognition. And he says the concepts must be pure rather than empirical, so they can't be intuition. They must belong not to intuition and sensibility, but to thought and understanding. So he's beginning to draw the line more clearly for us. And this is on page B89, A64, B89, the Transcendental Analytic. And he says, and he also says we need elementary concepts, right? And but that's not a big deal, because that's basically saying we're going to need logic. And then he says we need a table of these concepts that is complete. So the concepts must occupy fully the whole realm of pure understanding, right? Which is kind of like what we've been discussing. Is this just too much to kind of bite off? He's kind of bit this off, and we can go ahead and test it. We can go ahead and try it out. We can. I had this idea of like going through newspapers online and finding all the possible judgments, kinds of judgments that people make. But and maybe he's done a bit of that in his critique of judgment. That's something to look at too. It's like he did do a critique of judgment, so maybe some of it's there, but he doesn't talk about that because he hadn't read the book yet. He hadn't written the book yet. So although I don't see any, I do see a lot of footnotes from Pluhar about the critique of judgment. So there's probably some stuff there. But we're talking about not the manifold of intuition, manifold of appearances. We're talking about the manifold of thoughts. So that's my answer. Next we have Jason. Jason was speaking next.
Just continue what James talked about. I think it's also answer the question. I think people want to talk about 21st century, the base, everything. I think reading Kant, just like you reading everything, I don't think you are going to apply all the 12 concepts to today's science. I don't think it's going to work. Just like when you read Freud, right? You are not going to read Freud and then try to help a patient or help people to find out what's the subconscious of the person's mind, because they have a new technology. So the reason I still enjoy reading this, even I know the judgment or 12 proposition is totally different in today's concept. But when I read this one, I put focus on Kant's effort. He tried to complete. I think the keyword on James just read it. I think this table of them be complete. The completeness is he tried to do. He tried to complete this, exhausted all the concept we have. Okay, and then I think he has a further purpose because he want to complete this one, and then he want to say this one is only work for our experience. You cannot jump too far. So that's lead to the situation you cannot use this one to say God is immortal or God is great. That's totally out of this concept. At least I think that's his concept. And I don't think in today you are going to read this one and find the 12th category and find the real work in your science research or anything. I don't think it works this way. But I do think that's important because the way how Kant formed this concept, he starts from the proposition and then work backward, get the concept of category. Then he tried to claim its completeness, and then he moved move forward in his deduction. He want to prove. He tried very hard, even have a lot of problems, but he tried very hard to prove there's no more. Okay, everything should be empirical. You apply these 12 categories to empirical experience. Everything outside empirical experience may not work. I think that's he tried to do, and this work. And that's the part we, at least me, learning from reading Kant.
Thank you. Next is Josh Sanchez.
Hey everyone, this is such a treat to find. I love philosophy. I'm running for office because it's actually something I want to integrate into our public school system. For me, ethics is paramount, and it changed my life when I learned about it in college. And it's a shame that I had to wait until I attended Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. to learn about ethics and Aristotle and Plato and to really grasp what philosophy is. And so during these unprecedented times, I think it's important that we address the lack of an ethics class in our education system. And so I'm running because I want to update Texas Education Code Chapter 37 to institute a ethics class. And I posted my link on the chat, and I was hoping that one of you could help me out with a $5 donation if possible. I think this would give you some good karma. I genuinely think so, because who we currently have in office, Eddie Rodriguez, doesn't talk about philosophy, doesn't talk about updating our education system, especially after this presidency. And so that's something that I really want to address. And so I was hoping that you all could find it in your hearts to donate $5 to my campaign. I shall be appearing on the ballot by the end of the year. I think the deadline is the end of the year. Well, it is going to be. I believe the election day is going to be the same in 2022, March.
What state do you live in?
Austin, Texas.
Oh.
In Austin.
Maybe you are in Austin, right?
Are you also in Austin?
I'm in Los Angeles. I believe David is in Austin.
Pennsylvania.
Oh, I thought this was a Austin group.
Oh no, we're it's cross-posted. Different. There's a thing called the Virtual Philosophy Network, and it's a list of every group that does philosophy in like half of the world. So from Australia all the way to Great Britain.
Yeah, we have an Aussie here. Yeah, this is Seattle, Toronto, it's everywhere.
So, the cross-posting is done by David, Distributed Raisins, over there next to you. So, hi, David.
Where do I get raisins?
Distributed Raisins. Yeah.
Let's just move on.
Well, shucks. I wish that wasn't the case. But I mean, that's super cool, though. I don't know if you all can, if that resonates with any of you all. But it's a piece of legislation that I really want. This is actually my second time running for office. If you were to Wikipedia, or if you were to look up my name on Google, I would come up on Ballotpedia, and you could see how I ranked last time around during the primary. And so, yeah, like a $5 donation. I actually think that this is kind of leading into a question, because one of the arguments that I'm kind of an unpolished politician still. I'm working with a consulting firm at the moment. I'm shopping around, unlike last time, and my pitch that I want to just tell people is that this is going to be good karma. Like, between me and the other guy, you giving to me is going to inherently give you good karma points. And I have a very archaic view of what good karma is. It might be using the term incorrectly here, but I think you all know what I'm getting at. By donating to me, good things shall come your way. And so this sort of lands on my question to you. Well, it does. And it is that a fair argument to make? And is there any type of philosophy that could back up my assertion that by giving to me, you are going to be making good things shall come your way, because I am truly the better person over who is currently in office, who's been in there for a long, and I can make a huge argument how this guy's a bad person, or he's not really effective at all. He's a millionaire, like he doesn't do anything. So yeah, I don't know if y'all could answer that.
I got a quick answer. The philosophers that come to mind are, of course, Aristotle, Kant. He wrote a book called Critique of Practical Reason, which is a little bit about ethics. It's about formalizing a personal ethics, but it's a difficult book. There's also Rawls, R-A-W-L-S. He wrote about ethics. And there's a guy in Australia named, I think his name is Peter Singer, and he writes on donations. He's the donation philosopher, so he might be a good place for you to start. Although not everybody agrees with him, because some of us are penny pinchers. Let me tell you.
Yeah, I read the Peter Singer's book. Yeah, he's a donation.
Me too.
Yeah. And he even had a student, I think, donate the TV.
Well, thank you for your intervention, Josh. I think this is good. That you came out and told us about your project. To be elected, and you're starting out in politics, and wanting to make ethics a part of your political
the
drive.
course curriculum for an ethics class in high school is backed by science, and it suggests that critical thinking skills are greatly enhanced. It's beneficial. It's been beneficial for every high school student. Science proves this, that has taken the class more often than not. I haven't seen any piece of data to suggest that an ethics class in high school was detrimental to the development of a child, and so of a young adult. So it's actually something that I put on my flyers when I ran the first time. And when I talk about education, I always talk about bilingual versus monolingual education, and how that affects us as well. But really, for me, what touches me the most is a lack of ethics, and how an ethics class could really be the solution to end racism across the globe. I mean, to end racism in our generation, I mean, it's already pretty ingrained, but if we start at the roots, if we start at these, when the young, you all know where I'm going with this thought. And so that's why it's been, so when I think about an ethics class, I think about teaching the golden mean theory, Aristotle, Plato, and kind of branching out from a philosophy course and really veering it into these thoughts, these theories. And so Yeah, so I a little bit about me. So I took a semester in Washington at Georgetown. Not to belittle my education here, but I took a media ethics course when I was interning for a congressman, and so there's a huge, uh, ecosystem out there for media ethics and laws that govern. If you're going to give airtime to this person, you need to give airtime to that person, and or you could face a fine. And so there's actually a lot of governing bodies that weigh in on this stuff. Anyway, it might not seem like it, but there are laws. And so
I'm only interested in the ethics at work on a pirate ship.
Josh, I hear that Austin is highly gerrymandered. If that's true, then you may need to read some Machiavelli.
Cool.
I'm not kidding. I mean, there's a practical side to.
I forgot to mention Machiavelli and Nietzsche. Go ahead.
About alliances and strength and the way people act sometimes when they're not wholly above board, which could happen in the United States if you're in politics.
Yeah, that's what I've thought about too, because I've thought about building alliances with conservative groups that aren't happy with the incumbent to further my chances of being able to reach more people. But it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I had a professor tell me, "Hey, don't read Nietzsche unless you're going to get depressed if you read him." So,
oh no, yeah. So Nietzsche is always a project, but the thing is that he did call for everyone to build their own ethics. So in other words, he said there's a problem with morality, and that morality has been dominated by monotheism, shall we say, and that it's a kind of a steal, that our morality has been stolen from us. And if you read these other modern philosophers, you'll see that influence. You'll see them talk about ethics from a fresh perspective. Rawls and Singer and people like that, they all have a fresh perspective. And of course, even with Kant, he has a fresh perspective on ethics. So pretty much in philosophy, you have fresh perspectives. You just don't have Christian perspectives, and you don't have even with Aristotle and Plato, because they came before the Christian era, they're somewhat free of the Christian morality perspective, So if you do read any of these philosophers, you'll gain fresh perspectives, and that goes for Machiavelli as well. We got someone. I'm sorry, Daniel. You had your hand up. Anyone wants to speak? Go ahead.
Well, maybe I'll jump in, and I'm hoping, I wanted to thank Josh for bringing that to everybody's attention. But my vote as one of the participants is I'd really like to get back to our reading of Kant. And one piece of advice I'd have for Josh is that make it more about the people in the room rather than about yourself or your background or your perspective. Do a lot more listening, I would say.
Okay.
Yes.
So anyway, okay, I'll go ahead and start what I was going to talk about. I think I already did introduce it. In the beginning of the Transcendental Analytic, he's saying he's beginning to talk about the. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, he's not there. Transcendental Logic. So I kind of like the way he he sort of broke up the mind, which is kind of like his main objective here. He wants you to think in terms of a certain design for. He even mentions psychology, and the psychology of the 18th century, obviously. He says a general logic is called applied logic, on the other hand, and it is concerned with the rules of the understanding as used under the subjective empirical conditions taught to us by psychology. Hence, such logic has empirical principles, although it is general insofar as it deals with our use of the understanding without distinguishing the understanding's objects. So, it's not a canon of the understanding as such, nor an organon or mechanism of special sciences, but solely a cathartic for the common understanding. That's at B78. But he is kind of like analyzing his methodology a bit here, and I like that. He says, and his claim that pure general logic is demonstrated doctrine. That's on that page also, under number 2. And it's the splitting up of cognition. Understanding that cognition takes place in the mind, and it's necessary for us, he says, to purge ourselves of the intuition and the sensations. And once we get away from the intuitions and the sensations, which are important, because when, and he says that when things first spring on us from our sensations, they are delivered over to they are delivered in our thoughts to the understanding. So he is kind of acknowledging that there's a base point. There's a base point in cognition that comes from intuition, of appearances, from sensation, even. But that base point is developed, removed from intuition. So that's kind of what I gained from starting out the Transcendental Logic. I'm sort of gaining an appreciation that he wants to just simply section off the brain, kind of in a way that I do, and a lot of people do. So we section off our thinking, and the way he's sectioning it off, he's trying to the intuition and saying that there's a pure form of thought, and this pure form of thought is worth investigating. I'll just leave it there. I just want to let everyone know that if I'm thinking a little bit, that he's opened up a little bit of a window for me to sort of ride along, and through the Transcendental Logic, and obviously through the Transcendental Dialectic too, because that's an object for me. I want to get to the Transcendental Dialectic and find out how he formalized his revision of dialectics. So that's something that's really of interest to me, and it's also half the book. There's about 300 pages of Transcendental Dialectic in the book, so some people obviously might read it. Next person would be Jason Peng.
Well,
I think Scott had his hand up.
Oh, it's ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, Scott.
Oh, yeah. I thought it'd be worth pointing out that there's a distinction in the intro here, and this distinction is going to be his whole problem that he's trying to overcome. So he comes into his new Copernican constructive, his his grammatical constructivism from the old tradition where logic deals with concepts, and concepts are universals. So you're kind of pulling universals from a library, and you're saying all cats are mammals. You're not even looking. You're just taking cat out of the library and mammal out of the library, and you see, oh, geez, cat is actually contained inside of mammal. Mammal completely covers cat. So I can say all cats are mammals, and that shows me that the mammal's hoop, which is in the predicate, completely covers the cat's hoop. So the way that you determine logical truth is by this containment relation and by this subordination relation where you're distributing the predicate class on top of the subject class. Some would be partial, like this. All would be like this. None would be like this. So the logic that's going on here is a logic of hoop containment. Now, Kant says, guess what, everyone? We can use our logic applied to pixels. But how can this be? Because Hume has shown us that pixels and logical relations are heterogeneous. They're on completely different domains. How can the empirical content domain ever mesh with logical relations that work by pulling hoops out of a library? They seem to be completely different realms. So the Transcendental Logic is a story about how the imagination massages not actual pixels, but the placeholders. What he calls the pure manifold, which means spatial positions and temporal positions. So Transcendental Logic is about what the imagination does to pure, like a transparent XYZT. What has to happen to transparent XYZTs in order for the world to give us cats that fall under the subject and black that falls under the predicate? What is going to have to happen in sensation so that we can use some and all? And so this is his story. This is what he talks about. And so the key paragraph is at B102, A76. He says, Transcendental Logic, on the other hand, has lying before it a manifold of pure sensibility offered to it by Transcendental Aesthetic. So he's going to have to introduce a bridge between the geometrical screen and its empirical contents and the happy world of Aristotelian webs, where sentences hook onto sentences into a lattice of inferential syllogistic knowledge, where you have, like, this Gödel's incompleteness is talking about the spaces between the strands on the web, but the idea is that we can span all of knowing with inference. We can jump from sentence to sentence, and if you have a bunch of true sentences and you hook them together, then the whole web is true. Every sentence in the web is true. So Kant is trying to show, how do we get the pixel realm up into the web? And so this is what Transcendental Logic is about. And as you can guess, it's going to be about operations on space-time positions that unify and synthesize and suck plurality up into the subject placeholder, the predicate placeholder, and or, if, then, some, and all. And this is going to be the next 100 pages or so. Is going to be his story about what has to happen to pixels in order for them to get inside the Aristotelian logical web of propositions and then links between propositions, which is the job of reason.
Okay, thank you. Jason?
I forget what I want to. Okay, this section, basics, I just like to mention, I think he talk about human, the faculty of mind, and we start from sensibility, and we have understanding, then we have a reasoning, and right now we haven't got the reasoning yet. We done the space and the time, transcendental aesthetic, that's a sensibility part. And we only receive the information. We see something moving. We don't know it's stopped yet. We only know something. That's the last week. That's the sensibility and space and time. And then right now we are in the understanding. So Kant is trying to tell us how are we going to know what we see, what we saw is a dog? So that's the understanding. So we haven't got to reasoning yet.
Oh,
okay? So that's the point. So I think that's sometimes we jump too far. I think that's the place. That's the only place I like to make. And I'm happy, James, you since like Kant this week. I think last week you since.
Well, I don't like Kant. What I do is I tolerate Kant.
Okay.
But and I'm building up my vocabulary. It's like he's building his he's definitely building his vocabulary here, and I'm appreciating that. It's going beyond time and space and talking about thinking and concepts, and also the manifold of concepts, which is necessary for synthesis. So I want to talk about that next, but I have Scott that's going to speak first. Thank you, Scott. I'm sorry, Scott H.
Yeah.
Scott H. Yeah, you're both the same person. You just look different in your pictures. Got it. Sorry. Yeah.
So the concept 1 and 2 are confusing.
Yeah. Actually, Scott, you never put your hand down. So I'd like to disqualify you. Is that fair? And go ahead and make my point.
So if you go to A78, B104, he gives a one-sentence summary of this coming section, so it doesn't seem so alien. So Hume is funny because he accepts that we can combine red and triangle in the red triangle. Does anyone have any idea how red and triangle can blend together? Like what the Velcro hooks that allow red and triangle to mix? What do they look like? It's absolutely occult. I just thought that was an interesting point. So Hume thinks that analytic truth is completely fine. So
Can you point out the sentence you're talking about, Scott?
So the sentence is bringing various presentations under a concept, a task dealt with by general logic is done analytically. So
what page of the book? A or B?
A78, B104.
B104. Thanks.
It's right near the bottom of A78. So you should see an A79 just right underneath the part I'm reading from.
Yeah, it's the beginning of a paragraph. I got it.
Bringing various presentations under a concept, a task dealt with by general logic is done analytically. So he's talking about the occult power that we have to do miraculous dissections on bachelor. We can take unmarried out. We can take male out. We have no idea how they mix. We have no idea how we take them out, but we do, and it's unproblematic. And because we're the agents that bring unmarried and male together, we can see that bachelor is unmarried is a necessary truth. Oh, it's so clear to us. It's so clear to us. It's so clear that he's using that. Even Hume used that as a standard of necessary truth. So now here's Kant's revolution. But bringing not presentations, but the pure synthesis of presentations to concepts is what Transcendental Logic teaches. So he's going to talk about the real problem, which is how we're able to see bachelors on the screen to begin with, given the fact that, like Hume says, we're just given point moments. And then at the beginning of the next paragraph is the other key sentence. It's B105, A79. And here it is. This is just to let you know, you can relax. The pure concepts really are syntactic forms that later on we peel off as universals, but they begin like this. The same function that gives unity to the various presentations in a judgment also gives unity to the mere synthesis of various presentations in intuition. So this is Kant's promise, that he's going to show you how syntactic connectors that we usually understand being on the logic textbook are going to play a constructive role in perception. So he's going to show how logical operators play some role in the massaging of pixels into things that are amenable to subject-predicate application. Why can we apply subject-predicate to the screen? There's no substances and no properties on the screen. Those are fantasies. So this is historical. That's it.
Okay, so maybe I took note of that paragraph too. I got something else out of it though. I like the idea. I do like the idea of the manifold of intuition, but also the giving of basically the lookup that's done. The synthesis is describing the synthesis as a lookup of concepts. So you look up concepts, and he says that there has to be a concept of a manifold. So if we don't have a concept of a manifold, then we don't have a synthesis. So I like that particular that's the next paragraph. Actually, it's what you read. I think the same at B105, the same function that gives unity to the various presentations. He says it's the same function, and that's a pretty idea. The idea that the same that's one of the prettier ideas. The idea that we're using imagination to pick up an idea from intuition, synthesis of presentations and intuition, and that the same function, in other words, the same function in the mind, is working to create the synthesis of concepts that's necessary for the pure understanding to work to synthesize new concepts. So that to me that's a very pretty picture. It's probably similar to similar to what some of us are thinking about how the mind works. From our backgrounds in cognitive science or in computer design and system design and so forth. So next to speak is David S.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, he does. This is sort of what would you call it? This is a Trojan horse in a certain sense, because it says it's the same function, but he doesn't go at this point and show you what that's going to imply, or that necessarily that the what you know about spatial intuition and temporal intuition imply the particular categories or in any way structure the propositional meaning of knowledge, the conceptual kind of knowledge understanding is going to create by gluing things together. He doesn't tell you how he's going to match them up. It's just the same function, and the only function he describes is glue. It's that you can recall things, you can call them up in imagination, and you can keep a kind of a working storage in your mind so that as you begin a process, you don't forget what began, and you can keep that all together as one clump, which is a concept. And the ability to glue that together, and the fact that you can do that, and you admit you do that to read this book, because he's not going to give you a chance to argue it. But I mean, we do agree we can do that until things are so complicated we don't remember anymore. But we know we can actually do that gluing process. So that means we have this transcendental, capability to put things together without experience, after experience, which are not part of experience. This mental capability is what generates all of understanding. And he's going to prove that the form of it falls in with these categories, makes space and time the rulers of everything, and that all of knowledge has to fit into his schema. But that's what he's getting at, was saying it's the same function. So I mean, he pulls the hat out of the bag at the end of the whole deduction in one paragraph. but this is where he's planting it. It's like a little Trojan horse. But I think he's completely honest. And, in a sense, he develops each of the concepts until you realize you're entirely ensnared in this. I think he does a brilliant job, though.
Well, he does say induction and sensation. In other words, it's not just the space. I don't think it's just the transcendental the transcendental aesthetic, the space and time. He's talking about all sensation and induction now in this chapter. He's also, which is different from the transcendental aesthetic. He does mention the aesthetic, but he doesn't dwell on it for too long. He also talks about specifically talks about synthesis and pure understanding. So I get the feeling that there's and when he talks about pure understanding, he's talking about everything that can be synthesized into the pure understanding. So in other words, how new concepts come from old concepts. You have a concept, and from a particular concept that gets highlighted, you draw other concepts, and it's a little bit like trial and error, because the new concepts that are being drawn in, he says, have to contain a special type of concept called a manifold. And if one of the concepts is not a manifold, then a synthesis does not occur. So he's leaving, to me, David S., he's leaving the door wide open. He's basically saying he's letting us out of school to a certain extent, and that I appreciate a lot. He's not stating that everything is going to be. It's not like in the transcendental aesthetic when everything had to be tied to space and time in order for it to be pure. He's saying there's a new method of creating purity, and that method is synthetic understanding. So pure synthetic understanding. I don't have any hands up, so.
Well, I like to finish the paragraph that James is starting with there. The one that begins the same function. I should have read more, but back in the olden days, I'd only highlight the first sentence. So the same function in the various presentations in a judgment. Now he's talking about term relations, and terms are basically grunts. So the way that we understand automatically when you position the grunts that you're giving metaphysical weight. So the first grunt is going to be the animal that you're pointing at, and the second grunt is going to be either dangerous or food or something like that. And so all the humans, early humans, had this. So this is an innate syntactic thing that the one grunt is pointing, it's ostensive, and the second grunt is bringing up a quality, something else. So this is the miraculous bridge between the unity of terms in a judgment and this completely other realm, which is the unity of these empty placeholders, these space-time pixels. And the next sentence he says, this unity, speaking generally, is called pure concept of understanding. Hence the same understanding, and here's the crazy part, and indeed through the same acts, whereby it brought about in concepts the logical form of a judgment by means of analytic unity, which is pulling out pulling out unmarried and male, that type of thing, also brings into its presentations a transcendental content. And this is what David was talking about. Not the Humean glue of, oh, my dad hit me, so whenever I smell Old Spice, my face hurts. Right? That's an associative reproductive unity. But the imagination for Kant has an original genetic power. It's not just an echoing, which is what it is for Hume. Also brings into his presentations a transcendental content by means of the synthetic unity of the manifold and intuition as such. And because of this, these presentations are called pure concepts of understanding, applying a priori to objects. So when you're looking out at the world and your mouth is hanging open, as soon as the epistemic attitude comes up, you're going to stop daydreaming, and you're going to see bodies in space, and you're going to compulsively see them as persisting over time. So these are the categories, but they're not. We may not know them yet, but even the primitive knows that a stone is a thing, and it's going to be itself over time. Bringing such a transcendental content into these presentations is something that general logic cannot accomplish. So this is his work. Aristotle can't tell us how it is that sensations come together into snakes and rocks. But Kant is going to show us how these logical things that we thought were just for pulling words out of the library and doing hoop relations, a new type of relation is going to happen now when we aim these at the world. And he's not talking about aiming concepts at the world. He's talking about aiming this, which is the empty subject place, is, and then some quality, the empty predicate place. So the way that subject and predicate grammatical places, the way that we aim them at the screen of passing pixels is what transcendental logic is about. And like David said, he's going to say that all that the understanding does, because remember, he's an empiricist as far as he can go. All the understanding does is tell us the ways of gluing. It's not going to tell us how to fill in the pixels, only the way that we connect them. And by the way that we connect them, we're going to invent substance. We're going to invent quality.
That's interesting. Yeah, I forget what I was going to talk about, so I'll just leave it.
So he's a Humean. Hume said the same thing. He's like,
oh, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna talk about Hume. Yeah. So that thanks for introducing that. Yeah, Hume is really interesting because a lot of this, Hume was the guy who had a skeptical viewpoint about perception, and I think he helped a lot of people. You know, he kind of like spelled out how perception would not necessarily result in truth. That it was impossible to join. He thought it was impossible to join the functionality of truth to perception other than to talk about the kinds of thinking that were directly related to perception. So in other words, we could even though we can't tell whether it's an octopus or what an octopus really is, other than that we can count eight tentacles and many suckers and so forth. He other than the counting of something and the really basic things, we can't actually tell for sure that there was an octopus there. It could have been something else that resembles an octopus to us. So but he did say that there are things in the mind that can be related directly to perception, that our feelings can be related to what we perceive. So we might feel good about something we perceive, or we might feel happy, or we might feel sad because of some colors that we perceived, or because of the way an event spontaneously arrived and left, and developed. So that was kind of like a quick summary of Hume. But the Kant is getting a little bit more Humean in the logic, and that I appreciate because Hume was kind of like the summarization of the empiricism of Locke and some others, and Kant was, of course, trying to settle that big conflict that arose between Hume and followers of Leibniz, and he was trying to settle it in a very gentlemanly way. He was trying to say, "Hey, look, we think these things. We have our own concepts of everything. It's not unfair to say we don't actually see the stuff that we're seeing in a kind of like a certain way, but the stuff that we think about it, we can say we're certain of that." So he was trying to settle that. I think he was trying to settle that issue, and strangely, it was the treatise on human understanding by Hume that created that debate. Are we really understanding what we're perceiving? And his answer was no. We can't really understand exactly what we're perceiving. We're likely to be in error about anything at all. And was his conclusion. And then Kant is objecting to that and trying to turn it back to the certainty that Leibniz found in religion. Leibniz found in religion his answer for certainty, and Kant is saying no, it's not religion, it's reason. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I don't know what's next.
Can I say something since you guys know? Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about Hume. I think Hume has a skepticism, and one day he also skeptical about A cause B. He even skeptical about the causation. So if we look at Kant's table of category, right? Under the relation, the second one is cause and effect. So that's the way Kant answered to Hume. He put cause and effect in the a priori category of concept. So he's telling Hume said there's no reason to believe event A cause B. It's just happened this way. But Kant's answer is put in a priori category of concept. Kant is talking about the causation. It's not happened in the numinal world. It's happened in your concept. Before you see anything in this world, just like space and time, you already have the concept of cause and effect. So I think that's interesting to point out. That's the place he talked about. He didn't, just like James talked about, he nicely reject what Hume talking about. He just moved, okay, the cause effect from the real world, the numinal world, to the a priori concept. Okay, so he said, hey, it doesn't happen there. It's happened in your mind before you know everything.
Yeah, the only thing I object to is the idea that cause and effect is the word a priori. In other words, if we just said that cause and effect is pure in the mind, then that would be fine with me. Okay, because that would allow babies to learn about cause and effect, and that would allow cause and effect to come in through intuition. And that's where I think Kant, in a way, is actually correcting himself here. He does say that things that are a priori have intuitions that are attached to them. So he has revised the story a little bit, here, that in a way that I find is very pleasing, because it allows the possibility of learning where learning couldn't occur if you say everything is already a priori. In other words, these concepts are a priori, pure concepts a priori, which is that one phrase in Kant that gives me a tummy ache. Sorry about that.
Well, let me make another statement like this. So yeah. If somebody say, if sunny, let's go to beach, right? So without the checking, it's sunny or not sunny today, and don't worry about am I able to go to beach or not going to beach. If I say any word, if A then B, before I know A and the B, I already have the causation and the effect concept. I think that's Kant tried to put it. Without touch this word, okay, without knowing anything, okay, we assume that's a mature person, okay, we don't assume it's a baby, we assume that somebody, okay, and then without knowing anything in the real world, if he can say if A then B, then that means he already have the concept. Forget about it's true or not true, but he already have the concept. I think that's Kant try to point out.
Okay, David S.
Right, I think that at the end of B123, he's directly addressing the issue of Hume. The little paragraph begins, if we thought to escape these toilsome inquiries. And Hume is the toilsome inquirer who's making these toilsome inquiries. And they both agree, he says, this idea that the concept of cause is abstracted from our experience. We can't see the cause in the experience. We just, we don't directly, we're putting it out from our brain. So they both agree that it has to be grounded, he says. It must be either grounded completely in a priori in the understanding. It has to have solid ground, or you have to give it up as a phantom of the brain. He's not saying pure. He's saying we have to ground. We have to have a way of explaining that the world appears to us as being a world of cause and effect. And
where is that? What's the page number? Sorry.
The very beginning of 124, beat 124, the very end of page 123. It must either be ground completely a priori in the understanding. You have to have a solid ground, or you have to give it up as a phantom of the brain. And he's saying it's not a phantom of the brain. We're going to ground it in showing you that every concept for which you must talk about reality, empirical reality, has embedded you in a propositional structure which assumes the law of cause and effect for you to be able to talk about objects and space and time. You've already presumed it, and anything else is presumptuous and contradictory to the language of understanding, the actual thinking about objects. But he doesn't get to prove that until the deduction happens. Yeah. I think that's
Okay, Scott.
Yes, causality is a special case. It's the ripe fruit at the end of Kant's whole argument, because it depends on this. This argument is okay. So here. So Hume was like Husserl. He decided to stop the natural attitude, which relaxedly, automatically glues pixels together into these solids that endure, and they're continuously changing colors and all this. And he went into this artificial Buddhist, Husserlian thing where you're trying to minimize your contribution to the experience situation, which we very easily project. The things that we add to our experience are very easily projected and taken to the object side. So Husserl and Hume say, let's withdraw this. What do we have? And what we have are these, you call them minima, the tiniest points. They last only a moment. And that's honestly, if you want to be very, very honest and humble and say, all I can say is I get X, Y, Z, T's. And yes, I'm aware that I spontaneously put them together, but that's something that I do. So I'm going to have to withhold. I'm going to have to say that I don't know what's on the other side of the pixel screen. I don't know if it's a cat or, it could be a quantum boiling space that's producing virtual particles that's 11-dimensional, which is really insane, right? But actually, in that, according to our best models, it is. It's weirder than we can even imagine. It's worse than Cthulhu. It's just absolutely insane. Nonetheless, I'm going to withhold judgment. So this is Kant's greatest genius. This is what Wolff calls his greatest genius. Kant is going to say, okay, Hume, I'll grant you even that. But you realize that when you're saying, I see a screen full of pixels, that you have attached the same eye to every single one, which is like a trillion, right? If you're going to do the raster, because Kant talks about rastering, by the way. He says we build space taught by raster action. So that's a lot of rastering, Hume. That's a lot of line drawing. I know that we agree that the stuff of the soul might be flashing in and out of existence all the time. We can't be sure the soul's immortal. But you have to admit that if you have the same eye on all those X, Y, Z, T's, that you're sitting in a post-synthetic situation. You're resting on a mountain of post-synthetic provision because you have a unified ego. How are you able to take this? In slow motion, right? There's a lot of movement there. So, Hume, you say that there's no unified self, there's no unified world, that unity is all a fiction. But if you maintain an epistemic attitude towards those pixels for more than a moment, then congratulations, you have an identical eye. We don't know if it's a soul eye, but we know that the knowing eye is one when it's able to take in that whole thing with apprehension, right? You can sweep across the whole screen and say mine. So you put one eye on a million things. So this is how Kant is going to solve the manyness of Hume's atomism, because it's really not many. It's like James said earlier, it's a manifold. The mere act that we can say a manifold and space, where we mean space in a singular, is miraculous. So Hume is missing on the miracle, and he's taken his epoche too far. And he's not recognizing that the fact that he's able to make sense out of, apprehend, take in, and report on a billion things with one ego is a post-synthetic situation. So he agrees with Hume. He says, Hume, you're right, but don't forget, your ego is unified when you said that. Boom, everything's it's done. Hume is over. Hume's life is over.
Yeah. You can say that he sounds more like Hume than he does sound like Leibniz. Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, he's given Hume the full ground, everything he ever wanted to assert, and then saying, but you missed this glue.
That's exactly right. Yes, yeah, and so Kant sees himself as a formalist. He's in the tradition of Newton and Galileo and these guys that said, nature, I'll let you give me the empirical stuff. I'm only going to provide the glue. So so Hume is like he's the formalist of metaphysics. I mean, Kant is the great formalist, the great minimalist.
And it's also, he's not totally ignoring Husserl, although Husserl wasn't there for 200 years, because he says all experience does indeed contain, in addition to the intuition of the senses, that immediate stuff, through which something's given, it also contains a concept of an object as being thereby given. So when you do your epoche, you're not only, you see, so the concept means there's structure to being. So when you get objects, you don't just get them as pixels arranged, you get their structure as things, which is a conceptual unity. So you don't just have spatial unity, you have conceptual unity. And that's the fulcrum to push this thing over and say, you've got my concepts in operation all the time. That's why objects are objective. And in this sense, this is objectivity. Even though you think it's a subjective process, you don't even control that. It's just all going on if you have thinking.
Yeah, and he's reduced them to just a few, in addition to the two you mentioned. So Kant says, humans can't help it. When your eyes are open and you have an ego, you get space, boom, unified. Time, boom, unified. And then these new things, the categories, there's only a few of them. Body, substance, and quality and property. So you unify across the thing, that's the body, you raster across it, smearing your identity across it. Otherwise, it'd be what? It would be a bunch of pixels that are bundled. So Hume calls this the bundle theory. Is there really anything holding those pixels together on the screen? Be honest. Oh, shit, you're right. The screen could fall apart any second. Every XYZ is its own XYZ. There's no glue between XYZs. The whole thing falls apart. So Kant says that's right. So the first act is posit and move. You posit a point and you smear it across. By doing that, you inject your unity and make body, which is space unity and stuff. And then by kind of focusing your attention on the passing of time while cognizing the identical thing, you're smearing the identity of the point again through space, but now you're focusing on its innards. You're saying that the innards of that point are itself over time. It's trans-temporal unity. So that's how you make substance. So this is what Kant is doing. He's just using these minimal acts of line drawing in order to bring out of experience these meaty words like substance and body. He says substance and body are on the screen, and they also aren't innate concepts like Descartes and Leibniz and the simpletons would have you think that were built in with these concepts. You're only built in with syntax. And so the act is smear identity across space, boom, that's where body comes from. Smear identity of your intention of making the same point. It's like a rocket ship. Instead of different pixels, it's a single ship moving. Boom, you invent substance. You're taking your identity and you're smearing it through the time passing. So all these acts of imagination are accomplished merely through drawing a line. It's very inoffensive, right? You're not bringing out ready-made concepts. You're saying, just let me draw a line. That's all I want to be able to do. And just from the act of line drawing, I'll be able to get you what you want.
Wow. Okay. I think we're at this point, we're all artists. Thank you, Scott. I guess David, if you're there.
Yeah.
It's up to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. David has mentioned once more, and Kant does explain that Hume, he says it never occurred to him that the understanding might itself, perhaps, through these concepts, be the author of experience. So, that's what he has to demonstrate, but it's not till like 150 pages later that we do the deduction. So that explains what Scott sort of laid out there. The deduction is like 26, squiggle 26 when we get to that.
Yeah, the deduction's all about, remember a second ago, we talked about, here, remember, applique. We so relaxedly project our activity out there. And I mean, people love to use the word projection because it means you're kind of a loser, an idiot. I mean, even Oprah says you're projecting. So everyone knows what this is. But Kant is saying that we project very deeply, more deeply than a guest on Oprah. The substance is a projection. We just need to be like Hume for a second and stop it and try to get to the pixel thing like the Buddha wants us to. And then go back into substance, but catch yourself on the way and see. You don't have to add many things, but you might have to add a few things. And those would be what Kant calls necessary conditions. That's why they apply necessarily. So the transcendental deduction is about this weird thing. He's saying that unless you made those things that we project as being metaphysical things out there, like substance, causality, all that stuff, the reason that we project those necessarily is because what's actually happening is we're trying to save ourselves. Because those sense contents, which can be things out there, are also me. I am those sense consciousnesses. My consciousness arises as an explosion of individual consciousnesses. And he says this, each one's a totality. So Leibniz is right in a way. Leibniz is also doing FOK. So the moment of sensation, you're really a plurality. You really are a plurality. So Kant is saying this. I just want to say that you have to put those pixels together in certain ways. And those certain ways are the necessary projections.
How do you like how he's throwing phenomenological observations in there while he's doing this? It's amazing. It's a logical treatise on logic and presumptions that you're making in order to have a kind of thought called understanding that's consistent. And what that means for objects to have consistent concepts that don't contradict. But he's demonstrating all this with little phenomenological examples of your unity. It's really cool.
Yeah, and it turns out that in the end, all it is the self is a series of line drawing actions. But not all the lines are merely spatial. One of them is spatial. Actually, two are. Space and body. Space and three, he calls quantum. Space, body, and quantum, those are situations where the line drawing is literally a line. And we appreciate the spatiality of it. But time is also line drawing, but now it's getting kind of tricky, isn't it? Kant says,
sort of conceptual, yeah.
Kant says it's the same act of line drawing, but now I divert my attention away from the length of the line towards a game I'm playing. And the game is I'm moving a self-identical point. In other words, let's call him Joe. Joe equals Joe all the way down the journey. Boom, substance. And so all of his categories are going to be acts of like inflections on the act of line drawing, or like specifications of the act of line drawing. So each pure concept is a way of attending to the act of line drawing. And it turns out that in physics, this is what we're doing. We're turning even quality, right? Saltiness, pH, wavelength, hue, all these things that we thought were so quality-like, but they're actually, he calls them reality. Remember reality negation? This is what he was trying to say. He's trying to say that even adjectives are on a continuum of values. So we have very blue and weakly blue. And now boom, blue, which we thought would never be able to make it inside the world of math calculation, now it can be inside. because we've turned even qualities into magnitudes. But guess what? That's another active line drawing. But now you're drawing along the y-axis, which is kind of like in platonic space. You're not really, the continuum of blueness isn't in the world. It's a continuum, but it's a continuum, and it's so strange that we would even take blueness and arrange it as magnitude. But this is what his story is about. It's like 7 ways of line drawing. That could be the subtitle. 7 ways of line drawing. And these are important ways because guess what? Each way of line drawing is a way of your identity. So across each of those smears, it's you smearing your identity again. So the same thing that we use to make the identity a body, we're using it to make quality, because there's quality. It's another miracle, right? Quality, what do you mean quality? There's a million different shades of blue. No, blue. So even that is an active line drawing.
50 Shades of Blue. It's a joke. Sorry.
So Kant is saying that we have to be self-conscious. Here's the best summary. We have to be self-conscious when we draw that line. In each of those domains, space, time, substance, quality, you have to be able to keep yourself intact as you play that game. That's why they're necessary. These are ways of gluing the self together and the ways that glue the world together into the categories. Those are the categorical ways, substance, space. So they're one and the same thing, but from different sides. But all he's saying is you have to be able to keep, if you can't hold yourself intact, then that's not a human cognition. Only if you can carry yourself through the drag. If you can maintain your identity through time variation, space variation, substance variation. Are you handling? Are you still together? You still together? Oh, good. Each of those dimensions is an a priori unity.
Okay, let me see. David R. I think I'm ready to go home.
Time to go.
Think we're done for the week?
Yeah, we got a good start. We got a good start on it, I think.
Yeah. Doing this another week next week. Yeah, it's already up. I already announced it.
Oh, okay. Way to go.
Keep reading, everybody. Yeah. I mean, I didn't get very far, so I need to keep reading.
Got another week at least.
Yeah, and I got I got a good start on my I Hate Kant book. That's
Excellent. Glad to help.
Yeah.
You're going to need a lot more now. This is the most difficult chapter in the most difficult text in Western philosophy. So we're all in it together. This is like going through a summer accelerated German program.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Even lots of German.
Well, you say you can't stand him. Okay.
I can't stand him.
Yes. We've got a little bit of Kant criticism coming up. Believe it or not, we do.
In a different
not next
meetup
week. Coming weeks.
Okay.
Oh, you mean from the professor?
There's a little bit coming up.
Okay.
I'm thinking ahead. What's coming?
He said something pretty funny this time. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he said something noteworthy. I forget what it was though.
Yeah. Keep listening to the lectures if you're not, but I hope you are.
I listened to this week's. He was a little more interesting. Yeah, but he said something that was noteworthy. It slips my mind. But yeah.
If you have time to read all this and watch the lectures, I'll definitely do that.
I know.
Okay.
It's making an issue about our subjectivity. As from a naive point of view, we would look at our subjectivity and say, yeah, I'm definitely an I or definitely this. But of course, as we go along, we start to wonder he was employing the schizophrenic idea that there seem to be a number of selves within us. But he was claiming that Kant was making the proposition that there must be some one single element in the subjectivity for all this to work. So how Kant reasons that is a little bit beyond me, of course.
No, he offers you the challenge that if you're thinking that there's one of you, anything you can't think about isn't part of that.
That's right. Yeah, he does believe in the consciousness. Yeah, I think that's there. I forget what page it's on, but he does talk about it.
Oh, my problem is I think I'm a figment of my own imagination. So Kant's, if I study Kant, I might find hope.
If you consume yourself, you're definitely a figment of your own imagination.
All right.
All right. Ciao.
All right. Till next week, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
All right, good night.